Hello and welcome to episode 57 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern and Pioneer. This is Shane the Bone Crusher Beeps here in Denver, Colorado. With me on the line from Chicago, Illinois is the Torb Father himself, Dave Harbarger.
Yeah, I moved a lot of things from 1 damage to 3 damage in the last couple of weeks. It's pretty good.
How's the family feel about that?
Well, my 1-year-old's now 3 and my 4-year-old's now 6. And so everybody's just moving along fast.
Oh, man. Also with us, somebody who is absolutely not 3 goblins in an Aloha shirt. It's Zach Colhan.
I am so very excited. I now own 4 of the foil Bone Crushers, and I've got to play them for this deck and for my real deck. I'm just covered in Bone Crushers, baby.
And finally, today we have a special guest from California, the Chonk Meister himself, Todd Anderson. Welcome to the Dive Down, Todd.
Is that a fat joke? The Chonk Meister? Are you kidding? Holy jeez, Batman. I didn't know that I was going to be attacked on my intro.
I should have thought this through a little bit more.
All right. Hello. How's it going? Yeah, out here in sunny California. Excited to be on the Dive Down podcast. Thanks for having me.
We got quite the replacement for Stan this week.
Yeah, Stan is still cycling the fjords on his paddle boat.
God, he's getting in so many steps. Let's just say that.
He's longboarding on the cobblestone streets of Amsterdam. That's where he is.
Yeah, he's in Amsterdam still.
We miss you, Stan, but glad to have you here, Todd. Todd, you recently moved to California, right?
Yeah, my wife actually got hired by Blizzard Entertainment. She works on the...
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, she works in the Hearthstone department, and she's basically in charge of what I call her the PTQ system. You know, she runs their PTQs there.
Oh, wow, awesome.
All online, too, which is nice. So she...
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Do you play Hearthstone, too?
I actually play a ton of this new version they have called Battlegrounds.
That is very popular.
It's huge right now. A lot of the I think one of the members of the MPL actually streams it almost full time. What's the name? Savage. Yeah. He's been killing it, and the game is just awesome. So she doesn't have a big part in that. That's like a whole side project for them. But.
We'll have you back on the ground down when we start covering that.
Okay. All right.
Our Hearthstone podcast, The Ground Down. That's not a card.
I like it. No, that's fine.
Well, this week, Todd, instead of Battlegrounds, we're going to have you join us to talk about one of the most popular decks in Pioneer over the past few months. That's Big Red, or as the kids are calling it these days, Chonky Red. And this is actually our first Pioneer deck dive. And so we thought it would be best to have an expert along for the ride. And so prior to the dive down, we're going to have an interview with Todd during the breakdown, talk about his experiences as a player, a writer, a broadcaster, and now a streamer. And then in the wind down, we're going to be asking Todd some questions from our patrons of the Dive Down Nation. First, have a little housekeeping, though. So thank you, as always, to the newest patrons to join the nation. That's Jacob O. and Tyga S. Thanks to them for joining the nation. And if you have any interest in helping us out, joining the super secret Slack server, getting some sweet swag, you can check out patreon.com/thedivedown to see what we have to offer you.
Also, we're brought to you, as usual, in part by manatraders.com. It's how we're able to test decks on the Dive Down every week on Magic Online without stressing about buying and selling cards. Use sign-up code The Dive Down for 15% off your first month's service at manatraders.com.
3 months, Dave. They get 3.
Ooh, 3. Wow. I don't know if I got it that good when I did it. I also totally didn't screw that up by accident, and so we're just moving on. It's good. Fix it in post.
I'm not sure how that's how that works, but all right.
Yeah.
We'd be amazed at the miracles that the turds are editor can polish.
This is
okay.
We're keeping this all in. It's gold.
So with that all out of the way, let's give Todd some time in the spotlight. We'll head on into the breakdown. So Todd, thanks again, man, for joining us this week. So typically in the breakdown, we talk about recent tournament results, but since there's nothing too major to discuss this week, we wanted to devote some time talking to you, give you a little bit of a benefit of being on this pod with us. So Todd, people who have seen you in the competitive Magic scene likely know you as like an SCG and a GP grinder for a number of years, but now they also know you as a writer, a commentator, and a streamer. So talk to us a little bit about maybe your Magic origins.
So originally I started playing Magic in the like late '90s. A couple of friends of mine from middle school, they owned a bunch of cards. They got me into the game and bought my first Portal starter deck from Barnes and Nobles way back in the day out of the bargain bin. One of the first rares I ever opened was a Portal 2 Armageddon. It was super lit.
I still have one of those in my EDH deck.
Dude, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. And so after a few years, I was actually kind of isolated because I lived out in the country with my dad in Georgia for a while. And I would actually just like trade online with people to get the things I needed. And then I would actually just play against myself because my brother didn't want to play. It was pretty big bummer. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
So this was back during like the early 2000s. How were you like meeting people to trade? Was it like message boards online, like pro boards and stuff?
Yeah, it was definitely message boards. I don't even remember the one it was. It was so like 99, 2000, 2001 was about that time period where I was trading online. Maybe it was just Magic Traders. Is that the big one?
I was doing that on Usenet for real, like alt.games.strategy or whatever.
Yeah. So I built up a collection just like trading on there and just like play testing decks by myself. And every time I'd go visit my mom, there was a comic book store that I would visit and buy some new cards, and I would find people to play with and trade with and stuff. And it was very casual. Like one of my first tournaments I ever played in, I was playing Kavu from Invasion Block. Kavu Tribal. I put some Fires Yavimaya in my Kavu deck and got second place out of like, 15, 20 people. It was nice. And then it was all from there. I met a couple of people who actually went to tournaments, and then that really caught my attention after being very competitive in gaming and sports and stuff in high school. Then it was a very easy transition to get into. So
Awesome.
What was the first card that you feel like really hooked you? Was it the Armageddon or was it something different?
No, I actually it was probably Desolation Angel. Honestly, like I was kind of a casual player for a while, and then the first time Apocalypse, like I bought booster packs out of like Mercadian Mass Block or whatever, but really I started to really get into it in Invasion. And then the card that just like drew me in forever was Desolation Angel. That card, actually, I don't know where it's at. I actually have a print of it somewhere. It's somewhere lost in my new place. So.
People, I think, know you mostly from the SCG tour, but you've also, top 8. You've top 8 at 4 Grand Prix. You played in 13 Pro Tours based on the stats I could find. What were kind of your GP and Pro Tour experiences like? So
Grand Prix for me were always like the main event when I was like really getting into competitive Magic. And they were always a lot of fun. I didn't like travel around and fly to them too often or anything like that. It was just like, oh, there's one in Atlanta, or oh, there's one in Nashville, and then we would drive the 2 or 3 hours, and it was fine. It was fun. As I got more competitive and started traveling to more events and stuff, I started booking flights to Grand Prix, and that was always a huge financial drain because the payout was just not worthwhile for the flight costs. It's just unrealistic. But the dream was what always kind of drew me in, like to play Magic professionally. As I got older, as I got wiser, I realized that, hey, there's this place where you can play semi-professionally, and you also can make a living writing articles and making kind of like videos, like verses and things like that. And so I just kind of hopped on over to Star City Games' circuit, and that was much more lucrative and much cheaper to travel to than the Pro Tour circuit. And my wife, Callie, got a job at Star City Games running all the tournaments, and so I got to travel with a bunch of local people and also a lot of pros who actually moved to Star City to start working for them in the early 2010s. Jerry Thompson, Brad Nelson, Tom Ross, etc. That was like where I actually met. I don't want to say I discovered BBD, but BBD was like a random guy from Virginia, and I met him at like a game night. He had like made the finals of PTQ or whatever, and then like I introduced him to Brad and Jerry, and then we all became pretty good friends.
Was that around the same time that Ross Miriam showed up? We've had Ross on the show a couple times.
Ross has been he's been around for a while now. He's actually one of the long-standing members still in Roanoke. Everyone else has kind of moved on. Ross came around like 2015, I want to say. And he's been there 3 or 4 years now, 4 or 5 years. I don't know, a long time.
He knows all the restaurants, that's for sure.
Oh, he is into the culinary scene.
Yeah, we share a lot of similar opinions about a lot of those places. So.
So what's that transition though been like? So you were a regular tournament player, in the GPs and the SCGs, and now you're doing commentary. What's that been like, kind of going from a player to a commentator?
So to finish off the previous question, I actually just kind of got lost on my own train of thought. No, it's my fault. Playing on the Pro Tours was always exciting, but as for someone who's like, I feel like I'm probably like a B+ player, right? On my best days, I'm like an A-, maybe an A. And the more you like play on the Pro Tour, the more you kind of realize exactly where you're at as far as skill level is concerned. Like you can only get dumpstered so many times before you realize like, well, even if like you could spike once, right? It's not worth the just years and years of investment that you got to put in to actually be at the top of the game. The money's not there, honestly. And so what I learned pretty early on was that it's just more financially secure and lucrative actually to not only to play on the SCG tour, but to make content. And content generation is the only way that anyone can really make money in the industry as far as, outside of the top 10 cash people like PV, Mangucci this year, just crushing it. Brad Nelson, a couple other people like,
yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who have made a decent amount of money, but you could ask a lot of the people who won a Pro Tour 10, 20, 30, or 10, 20 grand or whatever, like 5, 10, 20 years ago. And like, that was a one-time thing for most of them, for almost all of them. And it's not sustainable. The system just doesn't allow you to, but the SCG Tour system, excellent. Transitioning to commentary has been a dream. Honestly, I love doing commentary. I love talking about the game. And honestly, the worst part about Magic is playing the games.
Ain't that the truth?
Just gonna throw that one out there. Have you ever drafted before? You ever drafted?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, playing the games is horrible. Building the deck, drafting the deck.
Can I just draft, please?
Yeah, and not to like circle back, but that's one of the reasons why I really like Hearthstone Battlegrounds is because it feels like you do all the drafting and then the game just plays itself out. Right?
What?
Because it's an auto battler, so you just set a lineup. It's like fantasy football or whatever.
Hold on, what? Why am I not playing this?
I don't know. It's great. It's a great game. I'm sorry, not to give them free press or whatever. They don't owe me nothing.
Longtime listeners will note that Dave once had a fantasy football podcast.
Nice. Oh, you might be really interested in this, Dave.
Blizzard Games, get at us.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ground down is coming. Told you.
No, it's the ground up.
The ground up. Yeah, ground up's good too.
Yeah.
Dive down.
There you go. You can have that one for free.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay, and along with the commentary, right? You've been streaming a lot on Twitch lately. I feel like, I love it because I work from home and I usually have a streamer on in the background. You're on my afternoon shift. You come on doing some cool stuff with Pioneer. What got you interested in streaming?
Part of it was just an amalgamation of all my various talents, being decent at Magic, being relatively charismatic, knowledgeable about the game, like understanding more higher level stuff, but being able to translate that well through practice. Like it took me, I've been writing for Star City Games for 11 years. And so I've been putting my thoughts into words for that long. And so now I just put my words out there and hopefully it helps people get better at the game. And that's, at the very least, that's the hope. And as far as like why I chose streaming, it just made sense. We were moving out here. Callie got the job at Blizzard. I'm not going to be able to do Versus Live anymore. That was one of my big ways to generate revenue. Thank you. It was one of my biggest ways to generate revenue was doing the extra content for Star City Games. But a lot of that stuff being in-house work ended up where, I'm moving out here and I'm basically just going to have to flap my wings, And I've streamed, off on and on for the last 8 years, just like, I'll go hard for a month here, hard for a month there, but ultimately I never picked it up because I didn't need to. I didn't need it to be a job, so I only did it when it was fun. Now though, it is a job and it's still fun, but now I treat it like a job.
I think you found some interesting ways, I think, to kind of get get viewers involved while also kind of, building the community as well, right? Like, how have you been enjoying the building the community with your stream?
I mean, it's been an experience for sure. It hasn't been easy, but obviously the Pioneer boom certainly helped. I was in there in the casual rooms on day 0 when they announced the format. I'm like, hey, let's build some decks. And I just got a couple of my my stream regulars and a couple of friends of mine to put some decks together, and I just fought them all day, and my viewership doubled. The next day, when it became like a real format or whatever on Magic Online, tripled. Top 8 of the PTQ, 10x. You know, like it was unreal.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pioneer, you've seemed to make a pretty big impression on the new format. Has that been? It's a pretty unique experience to kind of be able to hop in at the beginning like that. What's that been like?
Oh, it's been a wild ride for sure. I mean, people keep attributing certain cards to me for getting banned, and that just for me, I'm always having to be like, whoa, someone else did this first. I just picked up the deck and streamed it, right?
Sure.
Like I personally have built no decks. I hone decks. I take existing ideas and I try to make them better.
Yeah, I mean, the way Magic exists and the way like the online brewing community exists, it's really hard to sometimes give one person credit for something. I feel like people really want to do that, right? Like, oh, this person made this deck and this person streamed this, they had this deck. But it's interesting how just like, well, no, like 17 people at the same time thought about these red cards together and it worked, right?
Well, actually,
now that I say that.
No, it was very specifically, there was one person on my channel in my community that brought like this deck to my attention. I have a thing where you can pay $5 to do deck tech, where I just look at your deck, I tell you what I would change, what I like, what I dislike, etc. And also do like donation deck run throughs where I'll take your deck through a league. And so this one person, Jeremy Lichtenberger, goes by Killagerm.
Oh,
Yeah,
I've seen his name.
yeah.
I didn't know he was the originator.
Yeah.
Okay.
He brought me a deck that was basically Eldrazi red.
Yes.
It had Reality Smasher, Thought-Knot Seer, Matter Shaper, but it also had Goblin Rabblemasters and Embercleave. And those were the two things that really drew me to the deck. Over time, he actually kept honing it. He 5-0'd once here or there. He would bring the deck back whenever he would like get stuck when he couldn't 5-0 anymore. And then we'd make changes and we'd go over it. The biggest addition that I made to the deck was Bone Crusher Giant, which is just like
That's a big
it's a
change.
no-brainer. It is a big change, but once you think about it, it's just a no-brainer. Like it just makes perfect sense. And it ended up being one of the best cards in the deck.
Yeah, I'm still bummed about how we undersold. When we did our Eldraine spoiler episode, we kind of undersold the adventures in general. I think when we talked about them, I'm still kind of like months later bummed about it because none of them have huge effects, but they're all just 2-for-1s, and so it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, just even Brazen Bar, the first time you actually cast the front half where you bounce something and you're like, that felt pretty good. and then like 2 turns later, you're like, oh, now I get the dilly click now?
Yeah,
What?
exactly. I mean, even with Bone Crusher, like I saw it looked cool. And the first time you cast it, it's like, wait, end of their turn stomp, play Bone Crusher? I'm the best Magic player ever?
Yeah. No, I keep so many hands with Chonky Red where you just get to EOT stomp a creature and untap and just play it. And
God, it feels so good.
Yeah, it does.
What's been your favorite deck so far in Pioneer, though? Is it this red deck you've had the most fun with?
Oh, it's definitely Lotus Field Combo because
Really?
I love micro. No, I hate it.
Okay.
I hate that deck so much, and there's
You really
a new
sold
one
me.
now, and we can talk about it later. But I hate it so much. I don't know. I don't like decks that make me do a lot of micro transactions. Basically, if you want me to click 100,000 times to win a game, I would rather drop from the league, which I did today.
Oh, you did.
So the most you want to do is what, just like exert Glorybringer? That's like
Even that,
That's
like-
that's a good one, right? It just everything about Chonky Red appeals to me. Removal spells that can double as burn spells, which is nice.
Mhm.
Creatures that are good early and late game.
You're getting to the next point.
Okay,
Todd,
look,
come on,
you're
man.
asking me what I like, and I'm telling you why I like it. I'm sorry. All right, I'll shut up.
More on that in the extended deck tech known as the dive down.
Okay, sorry.
No
Don't
problem.
apologize. Not to us.
Oh no! Don't apologize to me. No.
Look, I'm from the South. We apologize for like burping. Okay, like, I didn't mean to make a noise. I'm sorry.
Here in Chicago, it's street rules, baby. Okay? So,
Okay.
I'm Zach. I play mostly Modern. So, how do you feel about Modern in the past year? Like, beginning of 2019 until 2020? And, we can factor into that. So, how do you feel about Modern overall the past year? And then also, how do you feel about the huge, enormous bans?
It's on fire.
It's
It's been on fire for a year, dude. Get
like a tire
out.
fire. It won't go
Get
out ever.
Right. It is the Simpsons tire fire. And
Hey,
everyone
exactly.
Understands,
Good catch.
everyone understands that it's the Simpsons tire fire, and they know that like nothing you do is going to put it out, and it's always going to be there. So it's best to just look away.
So you're not hopeful. Like you don't think the recent ban is
look
gonna do
away
much?
is really unhopeful.
I don't. Yeah, you know, it's not so much that the recent bans I think are bad. I actually think they're fine. I just think banning in general, having to ban stuff, is horrible. Just point blank. If you have to ban a card in any format, you are literally taking money out of your customers' pockets because they invested a chunk into your game. And you are telling them that money is now worthless.
So very interesting. Question about that. So do you think that some number of bans isn't perhaps acceptable or normal and that they really should aim for 0 and not have sort of a buffer zone? This isn't a loaded question. I'm genuinely curious.
No, I mean, it's a tricky scenario. Like if it's already bad, right? Like you have to ban stuff because I would not want to watch Oko mirrors in Modern
The pros
until
love
the
them,
end of
Todd,
time.
Okay.
So they said on Twitter.
Look,
anyway.
no one gives a crap what Jonathan Rossum thinks about Oko mirrors or whatever. Yeah, they're the most skill intensive. Who cares, dude? You'll finish one game. Congratulations, you won game 1. Nice deck, nice match. It's not fun to watch. Get it out. I don't know. Like the thing is about bannings, right? They are a necessary evil, but they're still evil.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you should strive for 0. And if you have to hit 1 every couple of months because of, you don't have enough resources, then you have to work on fixing that in the future. And all I've seen is them literally just using the bans as a safety valve to print overpowered, ridiculous crap. And I'm sick of it. Like Modern Horizons, I thought was a great idea. But all you have to do is you just have to look at a game file or whatever, like a card file of Hogak, Risen Necropolis, next to Altar of Dementia. Just look at them next to each other. The game breaks.
One is a known combo piece
breaks.
too. Known combo piece in EDH already.
Right. And it's not like like they were like, oh, what would be a really sick reprint to just kind of throw in there last minute, dude. Let's just put Altar of Dementia in there, man. The mill guys are going to love it.
I was going to say, so you're kind of a pass on Modern in general right now? And that.
No, I love it. I love playing Modern when it's not a huge dumpster fire, but it's been a huge dumpster fire for 9 months.
Only 9 months?
For 7 months, whatever, since July or June or July.
No, but I'm saying only 7 months? You don't think it's been a dumpster fire like kind of forever?
It's been a dumpster fire forever. The entire time. It is literally the Simpsons tire fire. But sometimes you're cold and it's warm. So you just stand nearby and,
Yeah, I found solace in many a Goblin Embrace before. Absolutely.
That Death Shadow deck is looking pretty cool. I guess I'm going to dip my toe back in for the next 3 weeks and then run away.
So I think, even if Modern isn't the best place to be playing right now, people I think have some hope after the bannings. What would you be looking at in Modern? I know our listeners would want to know.
Here's the thing. What is the one card that has basically existed throughout its entire time in Modern, has never been banned, yet always shows up even in the most high-powered formats? Just name one
Blood
card.
Moon.
Is
Blood
it a
Moon.
large green man?
Oh, it's a large green man. You may have heard of him as Primeval Titan. I think his name Titan.
That's
That doesn't sound like Blood Moon at all.
Sorry, that's French. I don't know. Primeval Titan.
Yes, prime
Primeval
time.
Titan has just been around in every busted version of every Modern format. And it's always gross and it always does something really stupid. And then it never gets banned. They always ban the specialty land or whatever.
I mean, that was the Mox Opal issue, right? Where Mox Opal was in every degenerate or bogus combo artifact deck and it was always a card around it. So do you think Titan's days are numbered?
I think generally speaking, it's just going to be one of those cards that's always potentially problematic.
Sure.
And if you want to ban it at some point, you're just going to piss off like a lot of people. And it's the same reason like you don't really want to ban Mox Opal because it was like $100 card, and it just is the centerpiece of 20 decks. Same with Faithless Looting, except
Right.
Faithless Looting costs
Right.
$1. So I don't know.
Well, common versus mythic, yeah.
Titan at least has had some reprints, so it's not that $100 card yet. But yeah, I think it's one of those pillars of the format that people continue to build around. And like you said, it hasn't seemed to be even on a watch list yet.
No, I mean, if you just look at these Simic Field of the Dead decks that have popped up in the last few months of Modern, like, you'll understand that it's nothing but Primeval Titan. It's the only card that matters in any of these decks. And it's always about Rampant and Primeval Titan. You play 4 Summoners Pack to find more Primeval Titan. And sometimes you have an artifact with it, but it's not even clear that Amulet Titan is better than the normal Simic Ramp versions. Or World Grazer's showing up. And now with Elysian Dryad, I think it's what it's called, like now that deck can just play like 2 copies of Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, and it's just fine. And no one cares. It's like, why are we able to do this? I don't understand. This card is not okay.
Throw another tire on the fire.
And that's Primeval Titan. Primeval Tired.
And that tire has a name.
Primeval Tireton. That's good.
All right, let's loop back to Pioneer really quickly.
Head west real quick.
Last few questions for you, Todd. Do you think there's a risk of the Pioneer format becoming kind of solved in any way?
Well, especially in context of like the way Modern is solved. Like, Modern got to a point where, a lot of people are just keeping an eye for how to do the most degenerate thing. Like Pioneer, does that have that same potential, you think? Or
I mean, especially with the tournaments coming up soon. So do you think that like kind of the pros focusing on this, you think things are going to be quickly rising to the top, or do you think Pioneer still has a ton of room for exploration?
I think it has a reasonable amount of room for exploration. I try to play different decks and showcase different strategies on my stream quite a bit, and I kind of come back to some of the same decks every now and then, like Mono Black Aggro, even though Smuggler's Copter got banned, is still pretty good, still puts up great numbers. Chonky Red, similarly put up great numbers, is very good in a fair format where there's not a lot of weird combo stuff. And then, lately you've even seen these like 5-color Nimbus that's cropping up that don't look like they make any sense, and the mana looks horrible, and none of the 3-color mana bases make sense. So why is this a thing? And I have no real answer. There's no answer. It's called Pioneer because it is wild and free, and it is awesome.
Cool. So you're still hopeful in the coming months. I mean, I think we are too, I think.
Although Underworld Breach may have something to say about it, but that card's not cool, dude.
All right, last question for you before we move on. What are your hopes for 2020 this year for yourself, for Magic, for your involvement in Magic?
I hope I get to do commentary on a bigger stage. I didn't get to do the Players Championship this year. I was a little bummed about it. But that's just because we had sets of commentators, and there was like one on one invitational, one on the other, and one on Players Champs. And Cedric and Patrick did the all 3 of them because they're just the best, and that's fair. But like I think there's going to be a lot of arena-based tournaments coming up this year with a lot of independent organizers, and I would just love to do more commentary, especially if I can do it from home. That's always a plus. As far as the stream is concerned, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to grow it slowly and steadily. I had a huge burst with Pioneer, but
So if you said playing Magic is the worst part, would you say talking about Magic is the best part?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start a podcast, but it's one of those things where you just got to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think our advice to you would be just do it and do it every week. And you got to grind for a bit.
Ain't that the truth?
I mean, it's a job. You're just doing your job.
It's a fun one. It's a really fun one. Really rewarding.
I've had worse jobs. Actually, Toys R Us once. Bad time.
I've told people this is the only band that I've ever been in that anybody wanted to listen to, which is like a very strange twist in my life. But
yeah, it's the best group project I've ever had.
All right. 2020 goals. More commentary, bigger stage, hopefully. Stream growth, just slowly steady. I had a big bubble burst recently with the Pioneer. I ended up jumping up like 4 times my normal sub count or whatever, and now I'm like back down to like 2x my normal sub count. So it's like, okay, we got it. Okay, hopefully we just keep chugging along. I don't expect instantaneous success, so the fact that I had it was like pretty scary because now I'm just it's like sand going through my fingers.
All it takes is weekly Pioneer prelim like finals. Okay, you just got to do that every week. Just
Sure.
Make it to the finals. Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, every time I make the finals of a PTQ, an angel gets its wings, and I've given away a lot of angel wings this year or this past 6 months.
I think every time you make a finals, Todd, a card gets banned. If I remember how things have actually been working out.
Two things can be true, Dave.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me think, just really quickly, are there any bannings that happened in Pioneer yet that you think were premature or silly? Like, what would you unravel, if anything?
I went back and thought about it a bit, actually, recently. Ryan Overturf, my co-commentator and fellow streamer, we do like a little get-together on stream like every now and then where we talk about the bannings or we talk about the new set, like we did a makeshift set review recently. And I think the only one that really stood out to me as kind of egregious and kind of like hey, we just really don't want Nykthos Shrine of Nyx to be good, was Leyline of Abundance. And it kind of breaks the game in some ways. Like if you just have Eternal and Elf, you get 4 mana on turn 2, and maybe that's too good. But it 100% was banned because it fueled Leyline. It fueled Nykthos. And it
Sure.
itself, like I sided it out a lot. Whenever my opponent was killing my elves, I sided it out, period. Like if they had shock or fatal push, it was gone. Because
Just too much risk.
yeah, because you're just investing a whole card into something that has basically no effect on the game outside of your Nykthos tapping for extra mana or whatever. Like sometimes it just that's the only one.
Do you foresee a day where that's like the Stoneforge or perhaps maybe Bloodbraid in Modern, where it comes back one day, or it's just gone forever?
You shouldn't do that. In my opinion, you should not do that with cards that are only going to lead to unfair games. I think with Stoneforge Mystic, there's a lot of back and forth. Leyline's kind of hard to interact with. It does something unique that not a lot of decks can really do anything about. And I just don't foresee that being the card that they bring back. Oath of Nissa, maybe. But then you have to contend with like freaking Kethis combo and stuff like that, abusing it. And, unbanning stuff is always dangerous because there's a reason it was banned in the first place. But then again, you have the cards like Wild Nacatl, or that were just banned because the pros would not stop playing with it. Like the pros just kept playing Wild Nacatl blue decks, right? Yeah, exactly. Josh Utter-Layton just wouldn't stop playing Wild Nacatl and Negate in his deck, and so they had to ban it.
So Todd, before we leave this kind of interview segment, do you want to just give us your Twitch handle and your schedule and everything?
Yeah, so it's strong_sad. Strong Sad is like the character from Homestar Runner, if y'all remember that one.
Raise back up a coffee, I believe.
No, that's Homestar. Raise back up a coffee.
I just want everything to be Homsar, and I wanted you to do the voice, so welcome to my honey trap.
Yeah, my stream schedule, I usually start around 3 p.m. Eastern time, basically every day. I take off one day on the weekend, usually either Saturday or Sunday, depending on if there's a PTQ on one day or another. But if there's a major tournament for me to play on one of those days, I will be playing it. During the week, almost every day, I start around 3 p.m. Eastern, and strong_sad. There it is.
So we're going to move on to the dive down, where we talk about Chonky Red in Pioneer with one of the main innovators of the deck. So stay with us. So everybody, if you have been paying attention to the shifting metagame in Pioneer, you likely have noticed that a certain style of big red deck has been gaining a lot of traction over the past month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and is currently one of the most popular and seemingly most powerful decks in the format. So you curve from 1-drops like Soulscar Mage all the way up to the 5-drop in Glorybringer. This deck's affectionately known as Chonky Red, and it looks a lot different than the mono red aggro decks that you might be used to. And so today, of course, we still have Todd Anderson, a noted Chonky Red enthusiast, with us to go over what Chonky Red's trying to do, why you might want to play it. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the development of the deck. We'll talk about the cards, of course, and how they execute the deck's game plan, how to think about playing with and against the deck, and then devote some time to talk about how it's evolving to try to stay ahead of the changing metagame in Pioneer. Todd, you even wrote an article recently on SCG about Chonky Red, right?
Yeah, I did a full breakdown of the card choices and common misconceptions in the archetype. Like, for example, one of the biggest things that people kept calling it was like an aggro deck. And it's not. It's a mid-range deck. And once you just hear that, your entire approach to the archetype just changes. And like people's win rates have just gone up since they started listening to me. So
Yeah, so like,
Listen to Todd. Your rates will go up. That's the one thing we want you to understand today.
Put that on a pin.
let's talk about that. Let's talk about what Chonky Red's trying to do, right? So help us understand what it is. Like, how is it different than kind of an aggro red deck?
So at its core, it's a mid-range deck. You have some aggressive elements, but every mid-range deck throughout history has either leaned towards more control or leaned towards more aggro.
Sure.
And the reason why that people choose to play them is because they're malleable and they're flexible. And you play those types of decks because you're good at being like reacting to what your opponent is doing. If your opponent's a control deck, well, I have these 1-mana creatures that can grow, or I have these 2-mana creatures that play defense and offense both. And then you kind of leverage those creatures with a little bit of disruption, whether that's discard or removal or whatever. And you turn that into a coherent strategy. And after sideboard, you are advantaged in a lot of scenarios because you can cut down on your control elements in favor of aggressive elements or vice versa. And voila, that's a mid-range deck. That's how it works. And this is exactly that. You also gain the benefit with Chonky Red of being able to just play like a really aggressive game plan with the likes of Goblin Rabblemaster. And you have one of the better top-end threats in the format in Glorybringer. And because of the format, it kind of is sitting in this place where most decks play some number of creatures or planeswalkers, and they're vulnerable to hasted things. Cards like Glorybringer are just, they're super valuable right now. And one of the reasons why this deck is popular is and good is because it's playing 4 copies of Glorybringer.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed that makes this deck look a lot different than kind of what one might think is an aggro red deck is it runs a ton of lands, like 25, 26 lands. Like, why is this deck able to run so many lands?
So for those of you who've been playing like Magic for a long time, you'll know that the card Mutavault is particularly busted. Like, it's just very good, and it's been a key part of many mid-range and aggressive strategies for a very long time, specifically in 1 and 2 color decks. Think back to original Theros block, Pack Rat, 4 Mutavault, Mono Blue aggro 4 Mutavault, and there were many others, right? Even before that, the original printing in Morningtide with fairies, it was a huge part of that deck as well. Now, we are in a format where it's way less about tribal synergies or, I don't know, color metrics, whatever you want to call it for devotion. And it's way more about just using all your mana every single turn. And Mutavault allows you to take any amount of extra mana and dump it into the Mutavault and attack for 2 extra points of damage, or at the very least threaten to block 2 points from the opponent. And
there's all those like random like tribal synergies, right? Like it pumps up 1 on Rabblemaster, and that matters.
Right. No, the 1 extra damage from Rabblemasters does matter. That is like, I will say this, if it were just Mishra's Factory, I would certainly still be playing it. Like, it's just good. And that part of it in this deck is not that relevant, but you are correct. And every little bit does help. So it runs so many lands because A, you never want to miss a land drop. And B, if you can always find ways to use the extra mana, always hitting your land drops is great. You can flood out with a deck like this and still be fine because you have Mutavault, you have Raminap Ruins, you have Castle Embereth, and all those lands just let you use extra mana. And they all kind of function like half spells. And every time you get to cast half a spell, you're not really flooding.
And this is one of those times where all these lands are also pretty playable in Modern. And like a lot of modern sort of big red or red stompy decks are running Raminap and Embereth, and just they're good ways to spend your mana. Like, hold up removal, and if you think they're not going to use it or don't need it, then you get to pump your team by 1, and you make tokens, as we'll get into. I love this deck. I love Castle Embereth. It is a very silly card.
I think one of the things that's the most interesting about the lands in here, though, is that all of these get to convert directly into damage, basically. And I think that's one of the things that really kind of draws a distinction from the other kind of decks that get to run similar packages, right? The mono black deck doesn't really get to run the black Hour of Devastation land that, in Raminap Ruins is, because it doesn't have an effect that's quite as useful. Where here you get
near Ruins or whatever.
Yeah, and similar. I mean, Castle Lochwain is great, of course, and totally worth running in multiple copies so you can draw cards. But I can't tell you how many times Raminap Ruins, when I was playing this Chonky Red deck, really saved me, either through top decking it or playing one early and being like, I'm running out of gas. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have the last 4 damage because I have 2 Raminap Ruins in play and I get to cash them in. It's a great way to extend your reach, and similar to Mutavault in that way.
No, exactly. That's certainly a great point and a great usage of the lands there. And I'll say this too: the threat of Raminap Ruins is often almost as good as the Raminap Ruins itself, because it also dictates how your opponent plays the game. Like, for example, if I have let's say Lightning Strike or Bone Crusher Giant with the ability to stomp in my hand, but I also have Raminap Ruins. A lot of times my opponent just is unaware that they're within lethal damage range. And so they make a play that is more aggressive, getting onto the battlefield to try to match the things that I'm playing. And instead, I just get to burn them out from 7 damage sometimes. And with cards like Chandra, Torch of Defiance, Raminap Ruins, Goblin Rabblemasters doing that chip damage, and then all the normal burn spells like Wild Slash, Stomp, and Lightning Strike. Like, you can just start throwing burn at your opponent when they're at 10 life, and they will probably die before they kill you. And that's just how the deck works.
Yeah, it's super fascinating to me because this is one of the... It's funny that we hopped into the lands the first thing to talk about this deck, because we had, our
real
notes,
estate is where you got to start. Dave.
Exactly. Our notes had the deck in a totally different order, and we're like, but first we got to talk about how sweet this mana base is, because you never feel like you're flooded. And you mentioned that earlier, but that's the main point, is like, your lands are good draws.
Oh, absolutely. And like sometimes you can double activate Castle Embereth if you have 2. Like that's the dream. And like you don't get to do it often, but then it's like, how do you lose a game? My goblin tokens are 3/1s, and like imagine a Torburn. Poof.
Right. I think one of the things that I try to consider when I'm building decks is, how often am I looking at my opening hand and saying to myself, I will win this game if I draw 5 lands in a row?
Yeah.
And I've seen you say that so many times.
Yeah, and whenever that's the case, I'm like, maybe this deck just needs like 1 or 2 more lands. And every time I've added lands to the deck, I've never been unhappy. I've never in my entire life been unhappy adding a land to any deck that I'm playing, except Tom Ross's like 17 land decks that he plays or whatever sometimes, where he's just a madman, but it just works because it's Tom. Stuff like that. But if I can look at a deck and just say, I would love to draw 4 lands in a row, then you should add a land to your deck.
Yeah, so Todd, you've convinced me already. I'm just going to only play this deck from now on. But I think this deck has really caught on quickly, right? So why do you think people have enjoyed playing with this deck, and why have you enjoyed playing with this deck?
It's honest magic. And I think that that's something you don't get a lot in the Eternal formats, is just playing on the table, killing creatures, playing creatures of your own, like that type of generic ABC magic just doesn't happen nowadays. And the deck is complex. Don't get me wrong. Every single card has 2 modes. There's a lot of extra mana generation. There's a lot of sequencing potential. Like, how often do you lead with Mutavault on turn 1 versus holding up Wild Slash? Because I lead with Mutavault a lot.
Really? Wow.
And it sometimes burns me because then I can't slash it. But
yeah,
if
there's a risk reward there.
Right. But if your opponent leads with like Hallowed Fountain, you just get to attack them for 2 because you don't have 2-drops.
In the dark, I almost always led with Mountain. That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's totally interesting. So we've talked about like the comparison you can draw to Modern is Skred, but Skred has to play Blood Moon, right? Like that deck has to have that unfair access. It can't play that ABC creature game like you mentioned. But Pioneer, because it doesn't have as much, the complex mana base, as much degenerate combo, as much fast things, you get to do things like play a Rabblemaster on curve, or and like not be like, well, I might be dead on Crackback, we'll see what happens, and just like play out your hand and have fun. And like I really enjoyed that sort of maybe back to basics, but I mean basic in a derogatory way, or like
no, you're absolutely right. It's ABC Magic, and that's but a lot of us came to Magic playing that. We weren't really exposed to combo decks until later on. So our experience with Magic is just play a creature. Oh, it dies. Okay, play another one. Okay, kill yours. And you have this game where it's about establishing dominance on the battlefield. But if you look at Legacy, you look at Modern, and hell, you look at even Standard the past couple of years. And for Legacy, it's all about the hand. It's all about brainstorm, ponder, sculpting, figuring out how to use your mana the best way and make sure that you don't die to random combos via force will, etc. You look at Modern, there's a lot of big haymaker turns, but there's not a whole lot of back and forth. There's not a whole lot of interaction. It's usually very one-sided games where if the person A has the answer to person B's combo, the game ends. And so now in Pioneer, we're actually finally at the settled spot where a lot of the degenerate stuff is banned or just not good enough because they lost one of their combo pieces. And now we just have people playing good old-fashioned Llanowar Elves into 3-drops. And Whether or not those 3-drops are creatures or not, like hopefully they are. That's more fun. But I think people were like, they're just getting sick of playing just, I don't know, the new school type of Magic where everything is just kind of overpowered and wins the game by itself. I hate that Magic too. So
Yeah.
All right, Todd, let's talk a little bit about the development of the deck, because I think that you played a pretty substantial role in pushing the deck forward, along with, like you said, your partner in crime, Killer Germ there.
Yeah.
So I think the first version that I could find, I went to the MTG Goldfish archives, right? The first version I could find that used Glorybringer, which I kind of consider like this is the definitive creature of the deck, was actually from you.
No,
like
it was me. It was
the
me.
middle of November. And like you had like 1-drops like Legion Loyalist, you had Robber of the Rich, you had Thought Knot Seer in the 4-drop spot. So it still had that kind of Eldrazi remnants. You had a Braid and Harness Lightning as in your main deck over the Lightning Strike. But you identified power level of things like Embercleave, Rabblemaster, Chandra, and Glory Bee. So is this kind of like, was this deck something, a brainstorm of yours, or were you getting inspiration from elsewhere? It was like a collaborative effort?
It was very much a collaborative effort with Killager. He would bring me the deck basically once every couple of days and be like, hey, here's where I'm at now. I just 5-0'd. Tell me what's wrong with it. How can we make it better? Right. And that actually just happened like 5 times. And I'm not exaggerating. I think he brought it to me at least 3 times to just talk about it. And 5 times overall, I think, between doing the deck tax and we played it like 2 through 3 leagues with 3 different iterations. And finally in the last one, I 5-0'd. And I believe that was like the list he gave me to play through. But Glorybringer is something that I suggested along with Bone Crusher Giant and a number of other changes. But that version you're talking about was so archaic that, like I said, no card that currently exists in the deck outside of Wild Slash currently exists in the deck, except Wild Slash could also just become Shock. No, and it would just be like the same damn thing. So.
Yeah, it doesn't matter as much in this meta right now anyway. Yeah.
Right. Historically speaking, if you want to talk about like the old cards in the deck, we did have Harness Lightning with Ether Hub. That was a way for us to be able to kill 4 toughness creatures, which were popping up at the time thanks to the Green Stompy deck. But as they banned Once Upon a Time, things like that, like you just don't need to do that anymore. It was important. It was very important that the cards at the 2-drop slot were instant speed, so that you could kill something on 2 at instant speed, untap, and play Rabblemaster on a clear battlefield. That was huge. And that's one of the reasons why we moved to Lightning Strike, because we also wanted versatility in our removal spell, being able to kill a creature or go to the face against the control decks. And that was, again, more of a reason for Blue-Eye Control popping up more in the format about a month and change ago.
Yeah, so how did the deck kind of evolve? So like, there was... as when Smuggler's Copter was still legal, so that started to come in more, of course, as people were like, oh yeah, Smuggler's Copter rules. Kari Zev getting added in the 2-drop slot. We saw
Kari Zev was me. That was nice.
That's a good card. We saw Hanwar Garrison and Legion Warboss kind of showing up, and then early December, Torbran shows up, which seems kind of like a really obvious inclusion, right? But it wasn't added till a little bit later.
Well, a lot of it was because of the colorless lands, because there was a long time when we had Hanwar Garrison in the deck, we would also play Hanwar Battlements, because the meld is very powerful. But but secretly, Hanwar Garrison is just good because it has 3 toughness. And similarly, Hanwar Battlements, the land, is good because you just get to give Rabblemaster haste sometimes, or your Torbran, or your Bone Crusher Giant. All those cards are great with the ability to give them haste. And it was another one of those lands, like Castle Embereth, that just gave you something to do with your mana. And so that's why we played it.
Why do you think it's come in and out of style, like the Hanwar Garrison card, where it's sometimes
it's because I cut it.
It's not?
It's because, no, it's 100% because I cut it. I don't mean to like toot my own horn, but both classics that were played in the last like 3 weeks at the Star City Games opens, right? The 75s were, or at the very least, the first winner was my 75. It was my 75 that I 5-0'd a prelim with, that I worked on the night before, just like off stream, came back in the morning, played it on stream, 5-0'd. And then a month later, there was no major Pioneer tournaments. The first one, the guy was just handed my 75. Didn't even know. I talked to him. He didn't even know it was me. Like, and I knew it was me because it was like I had 4 Tormod's Crypts in my deck. Who the hell plays 4 Tormod's Crypts on their sideboard?
Not me, sir.
When you can play Grafdigger's Cage or Leyline or whatever, right?
Yeah. What made you want to cut it?
The Hanwar Garrison?
Yeah.
Mostly I thought that I didn't really need to play with Hanwar Battlements anymore. And I thought that the synergy between Goblin Rabblemaster and Legion Warboss was actually relevant. And also that instant speed, or not instant, the immediacy of creating the token was slightly more desirable than the +1 toughness. And because Teferi 3 was starting to see a huge uptick in play.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Rabblemasters and Legion Warboss. Like, I love goblins, big fan of this deck once again. And not having to attack is huge, right? Mm-hmm. Like, being able to move to combat and not have to put your attacker or, put your Rabblemaster or Warboss in risk is huge. And they can sit back there and generate value for you. But Garrison has to put itself out there. And 3 toughness is big and it can survive a lot of combat, but you don't have to risk it. There's no math involved. You just get to make the token and move on.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think the immediacy of being able to create a token to kill Teferi 3 once it minused and bounced something was like, it's so annoying to play against if you can't immediately kill it. And both of the creatures in the 3-drop slot with Warboss and Rabblemasters have the ability to do that. Now, with that said, in my most recent article, I actually recommended a move back to Hanwar Battlements and Hanwar Garrison because there's not a whole lot of blue-eye control running around. And those 2 cards are really good in the mirror because A, you have more hasty things your opponent might not be able to handle, and 3 toughness on the Garrison is much better than the Warboss because it survives Wild Slash and Stomp. So it's more of the this is just like a living entity, and you just need to make a small change here, a small change there, depending on what people are throwing at you. And that's just one of the things.
And that's sort of the beauty of a mid-range deck, right? Is that you constantly get to look at you figure out what the 10 poles of the deck really are, and then you get to tweak everything based on the meta.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like things have been fairly stable for like the past 3 or 4 weeks, right? There's kind of 2 builds, right? There's your build that does that kind of eschews Chain Whirler, and then there's a Chain Whirler build that has the 4 Chain Whirlers, and because of the 3 color pips, it can't really run as many Mutavaults, so it usually has about 2 Mutavaults. And those are kind of where things have sort of stabilized until now we have the new Theros set, and things are going to shake up again, right?
Mm-hmm. No, and there's actually quite a few cards in the new set that I think have some potential in the archetype that I want to try out at the very least. But for the most part, the thing you need to understand is that the normal Chonky Red deck that I've been playing for a while now puts Mutavault to one of the best uses I've ever seen. Like it is one of the best Mutavault decks I've ever played, and because of that, I have been quite fond of it. And if you want to put in Chain Whirler, you just have to cut them, or you have to cut down on them significantly. And my personal experience in testing the archetype, I had very little success with Chain Whirler. I was playing against a lot of control decks where it was mostly useless. I was playing against, like a bunch of different decks where it just didn't matter. And I was also combining that with occasionally drawing one of the 2 Mutavaults still left in the deck, and also drawing Chain Whirler and just not being able to cast it. And every time I did, I was like, and I would stream all of this. So everyone watching would also be like, oh yeah, it's bad there. Oh yeah, it's bad there. And so I had like probably 2 or 3 leagues where I was testing out Chain Whirler, and it was just never good. And so I just stopped playing it. I don't know.
All right. We've been kind of, I think, beating around the bush of the cards and the deck construction. So let's just get into it. So I think, and Todd, I'm actually curious about your thoughts on these categories. We kind of broke things up into aggressive creatures, burn spells, creatures that are also burn spells. You kind of have like your sneaky win cons, your free win cards, like your goldfish cards, and then your planeswalker or maybe planeswalkers and cool lands. So what we'll do here is I think we should just we'll go over the cards in the deck. You can tell us, and Dave and Zach, I think, played a little bit more than me. I'll play MC. You guys all play Peanut Gallery. Tell me about these cards, what you think about them, how they fit into the strategy of the deck, and kind of how essential they are to making things tick.
The first cards that I think come to mind with this deck, and we've talked about them a little bit, are the combination of Goblin Rabblemasters and Legion Warboss, right? So I guess the main question I had, we already talked about how powerful these are as threats, and part of the one of the benefits that you love about them is the way that they can send a token towards Teferi 3 after a bounce trigger. My question with Rabblemaster whenever I play it is, how precious do I have to be about running this card out into against a deck that I know might have some removal, or how risk averse should I be about that? Do you feel like there's a way to kind of think about that, or kind of a heuristic that you use to guide you when you're doing that?
I'm one of the most patient players with the deck. There was one game in the preliminary where I 5-0'd with it, where I didn't play a spell for the first 6 turns because my opponent didn't. And we were playing like this weird game where we were just hitting land drops. And my hand was just like Bone Crusher 2 Rabblemasters or something. And I just waited. And because both of us are, if I'm hitting land drops, why do I bite first,
I totally agree with that. In Pioneer, 100%. I think that's the right way to go. And like, there's a ton of removal, right? So I think you really at least want to get a token out of it because it sticks around and that can mess things up. Like you mentioned, it can kill Teferi later, and that's huge. It can hit a Narset after, and that's pretty huge too. And just in general, I think it's in Modern, maybe I think you jam it out a little more and say, have an answer, like answer this or lose the game. But in Pioneer, where games are a little more lengthy and there's more grind, I think you do hold on to it until there's a moment where you can really capitalize on it.
Yeah, are you trying to just kind of extract maximum value out of every card?
I mean, for the most part,
economy?
yeah. I mean, it's all contextual though. I mean, there are some times where my hand is kind of glutted with spells, and then I just jam. There's no reason to hold on to everything. But if I have like 4 lands and two relevant spells in hand, and I know that my opponent's probably going to tap out on the next turn for something, and I'll just wait, and then I'll wait to make sure I guarantee to get my token.
100%. I'd rather kill a creature their end step and then play a Rabblemaster into a clear board than play a Rabblemaster and hope they don't do something.
No, for sure. There's this theory I've been kind of spitballing for a while. It's just centered around initiative, and a lot of games use the word in a way that is different from Magic, I think, where you just literally try to be the first person that has something on the table, and then you use that thing to dictate the pace and the texture of the rest of the game. And so if you play a Goblin Rabblemasters or War Boss and you make a token out of it and your opponent goes untap, kill it, and they don't play anything else, you have initiative. Until that token is dead, you have control of the board, and it is your job to pressure your opponent as much as possible without overextending until they match you, right? And so like I think that this deck utilizes that principle quite nicely because of the way that your cards do leave something behind a lot of times.
Yeah. Todd, why do you think War Boss is kind of one of the few flex spots in the deck? Not for you. I know that you're very much, anti-Chain Whirler, pro War Boss, but even then it's still like a 2 of in the non-Chain Whirler deck.
I mean, for me, deck building is more of an art than a science, where I'm just kind of painting a picture, and sometimes it looks good, sometimes it looks bad, and I can't really give you a definitive answer of why I'm only playing 2 Legion War Boss. It just looked right at the time, and it felt good. I kind of just wanted 6 copies of Goblin Rabblemasters, and I didn't want 8. And all the other numbers kind of fit. And sometimes it's just as much as this is an aesthetically pleasing number in this line of 3 drops, like on Magic Online when I'm deck building. And that's the truth. That I can't, and a lot of it I think is lizard brain stuff that I just cannot explain. I can't physically explain to you why I did it.
Sure.
Oh, I love 3 drops. I love it so much. And what are you going to do, right?
I think it's a great point to be like, I like having 6 Army in a Can cards.
Right.
And I didn't want the full set, and this is the other one that's good, and I didn't like the other options that there were in Chain Whirler, and so this is what I'm going with.
I mean, I think the tokens are just hyper important to the strategy. I mean, every token can matter because of Torbrand and Castle Embereth and even Embercleave. Like, there's a million things that.
Do you feel like there's a big functional difference between War Boss and Rabblemaster that people should be aware of when they're throwing War Boss out there? Like, what's the number one thing that you keep in mind?
The number one thing you keep in mind is whether or not you can clear out the next couple of creatures your opponent is going to play, because your tokens are going to get eaten up, right? But if you play Rabblemaster, all your goblins have to attack every time. Whereas War Boss, only the one you create that turn has to attack. So if depending on what matchup you're playing against or what particular situation you may find yourself in, you need to be cognizant of that downside. And if your opponent is unlikely to play another creature, or you're very likely to kill the creature they play to block, Rabblemasters' damage output is 2 or 3 times higher than Legion War Bosses. So you just need to try to leverage Rabblemasters when you can because of the damage.
Totally correct. And there's like a part 2 to this where if your opponent has removal and you have to play one of them, I would play War Boss first because of that reason, where its damage output is a little slower. So if one has to get removal, I'd rather War Boss get removal than Rabblemaster does.
No, definitely true. Sequencing is a huge part. Playing around certain removal spells and such is definitely important.
I think we got to talk about Soulscar Mage, because this card is very sneaky cool in this deck. And I think you don't realize what it's doing for this deck. I think more than a lot of the modern red prowess decks where it's like it's one of your beaters. In this deck, it can be a beater, but I think it has a lot of other utility. And so in case you're not familiar, it's just a single red mana for a 1/2. It's a prowess creature, which means when you cast instant or sorcery, it gets +1/+1. But here's the cool part in this deck. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, put that many -1/-1 counters on that creature instead.
Yeah, this text like literally never comes up when you're playing this card in mono red prowess and modern. Like you never have to do it. You're really just trying to jam and go as fast as possible and manamorphose someone to death.
I think it's also important to note that in modern, Soulscar Mage is actually just a worse Monastery Swiftspear. And Monastery Swiftspear is a legal magic card in Pioneer that I can play instead of Soulscar Mage. So I've actually made the decision to play Soulscar Mage over the other choices.
And why is that?
A number of reasons, and it actually was in flux for quite some time. Before Field of the Dead was banned, me and Killgerm both agreed that Legion Loyalist was actually the best one drop because it made the zombies unable to block. So you could actually Alpha Strike through your opponent's zombie tokens, which was really cool. It also gives Goblin Rabblemasters First Strike and Trample, so the buff that it gets from all the other goblins is more of permanent than normal because you can't just jump block it and prevent the damage and trade off with the Rabblemaster. So it makes blocking it basically impossible. But after Field of the Dead got banned, Legion Loyalist was a bit worse, so we tried to figure out something else. And I actually thought Fanatical Firebrand was going to be it. Killgerm stayed on Legion Loyalist because it was still really good for him a lot of times. And Fanatical Firebrand was pretty poopy. And so... right, that was the plan. That was still when Once Upon a Time was legal, I think. So I was still aware of it, or maybe it was banned at the same. I forget. Anyway, it was there because elves were still around, and I wanted to kill the elves. But the more that I played with the archetype, the more I realized I need that creature to have some amount of mid-game potential. And Fanatical Firebrand doesn't really have that much, and Legion Loyalist did, and so I was kind of missing out on it. But with the rise of the Stompy decks, the negative counter effect of Soulscar Mage actually became fairly desirable. And so that was a pretty clean switch. And even though you don't have a whole lot of ways to actually trigger the prowess, it's fine enough just attacking for 2 on turn 2 when you kill a creature. It's fine enough attacking for 3 when you double burn your opponent on turn 5. Like it's just a 1-drop that has a reasonable amount of damage output and solves a complex problem that red decks have been trying to deal with for years, which is kill a large creature.
Yeah, Dave, you're a big mono red prowess player. How did you find using Soulscar Mage in this deck versus the prowess deck?
Well,
did you like it? Did you find it weird?
It completely confused me at first because I'm so used to seeing it and being like, I'm throwing this down and then I'm just going to attack and just unload all the burn out of my hand. And I found really quickly when I was playing with this deck that just obviously doesn't work because we're in a mid-range deck. You're supposed to use your burn to kill creatures. You're not supposed to use it to go to face unless you're really ready to kill your opponent. And so it definitely took a mind shift for me, but I 100% think it makes sense in this context. I just think it's a good thing for us to talk about here. So if you're going to pick up this deck and you're used to playing aggro with Soulscar Mage, don't use it the way that you used it before. It really is in here because, like Todd said, it has mid-range potential to help you get through large blockers and have your burn spells power up to be able to either trick someone in combat or even just shrink somebody down to be able to get them out of the way eventually.
Yeah, 100%. It's better to save a burn spell and not get that extra prowess point than to not be able to kill a troublesome blocker later.
Are y'all familiar with the Galaxy Brain meme?
Oh, we talk about Galaxy Brain all the time.
You do the tiers, right? It's like normal brain, smart guy, slightly smart guy, right? So like level 1 is like use Soulscar Mage as the prowess, where you just like deal a lot of damage, right? Middle of that's like you've realized, okay, well, I should actually use this more of a way to shrink stuff. And then the last one is literally just throw a bunch of burn spells at your opponent to pump it. That's the Galaxy thing.
Yeah.
Because it's a circle, because it's all contextual.
Sure. It matters on the matchup, right?
Right. Like there are a lot of matchups where I turn 1 Soulscar Mage, turn 2, shock you twice, attack for 3.
Let's go.
That's just the most damage you're going to get out of those cards.
Right.
Yeah, when you're sitting there across from, like you said, someone who plays a Hallowed Fountain, there's not much else you're saving shock for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And before we move on to more creatures, and like we'll talk about this later, but this is mid-range and big red in general is a sort of deck style where you need to know what your opponent's on and identify what they're on pretty quickly to know how to spend your cards best. Because if you hold on to those shocks for too long and don't spend against a deck like you play Control, they're going to get countered and they'll be wasted. And then a game that you could have won is now them winning at 3 life.
All right, last I think of the aggro creatures right now is Kari Zev, Skyship Raider. She's 1 in a red for a 1/3 legendary human pirate with first strike and menace, which I think comes up an awful lot of times. Whenever she attacks, she makes Ragavan, which is a little 2/1 red monkey creature token, which I still don't have from my deck, and it makes me mad.
Fool.
And he enters the battlefield tapped and attacking, and then gets exiled. So he shows up, gets in there, and then gets exiled, goes away, back to her shoulder.
Shane, off mic, I'll sell you a signed token later.
Ooh, thank you. So what do you think about Kari Zev?
It's signed by me, Todd. How dare you?
Okay. All right. So what do I think about Kari Zev? Well, it's certainly a 2-drop threat, which is exactly what the deck needs, but not so many that it's a huge part of your overarching strategy. There are just some matchups where having a 2-drop threat is pretty important because it scales a little bit better than the 1-mana threats. But you also, on turn 2, a lot of times are just casting Stomp to lead into Bone Crusher Giant. So if you overload on the 2-drop slot, like you're going to find yourself not getting full value to Bone Crusher or just not having a great turn 3 a lot of times. So outside of that, I think Kari Zev just has, again, the 3 toughness, which I pointed out earlier with the Hanwar Garrison, which was good, was similarly why we chose Kari Zev. It also attacks for 3, which not a lot of 2-drops do out of red. And also, it's kind of hard to block.
This is a card that I love to mentor with Legion Warboss. Love making this a 2/4. Why the heck not? This is a card that has been in and out of Scred decks in the past of questionable viability, but I really like that it has a solid home here in Pioneer.
Yeah, I like this card a lot because I think the menace makes it so easy to just get in there and make them have to either put 2 creatures in the Kari Zev, which they don't typically want to do, or they have to block the Ragavan token. So it's just, I think it's a really good way to get some damage in there. And I think you said, Zach, mentoring it with Warboss is sweet too because it's a menace creature and 2/4.
Now, Dave, before we started, you actually talked a bit about playing with the deck a lot. What do you think about Kari Zev? Because I just want more perspective on the card because I like it, but it's definitely replaceable.
I mean, I think the big thing here is that it makes 2 threats, right? That it has the token. The token has a lot of resiliency because it can you don't care if it just gets chump blocked and goes away. Right. And I think the other thing is that the synergy with Torbrand is pretty amazing when you actually have that Yahtzee. Basically, we're like, okay, I'm attacking with all this stuff, and now this makes 2 tokens. And so it's a nice kind of it's on theme with the Army in a Can cards. It's just a cheaper mana cost. So I thought this is really good. I thought it was perfect as a 2-of.
Now, you want to hear a funny little story or a funny little trick with Ragavan? Ragavan just turns your Wild Slashes and your Stomps into 4 damage burn spells because everyone blocks Ragavan, dude. No one can ever block Kari Zev, and they're so afraid of dying to random stuff. They always block Ragavan, and you always get to combo kill their creature with Stomp or your Wild Slash. It's awesome. And they can never block the Kari Zev because it has menace and it has first strike. So they can't double block because then you just first strike down their 1-toughness creature and then kill their other thing.
Exactly. I mean, this is how you kill a Steel Leaf champion in this deck, other than with Soulscar Mage out, is they block Ragavan and you shock it. So that's a great point. So speaking of burn, the burn package that's in the deck basically is Wild Slash, Stomp, and Lightning Strike. I think everybody's familiar with those cards, and we'll talk a little bit more about Bone Crusher Giant in a minute. Anybody? I mean, what kind of thoughts do we have about the way? We've talked a bit already about not employing the burn plan for burn all the time or by default, that it's mostly for creature removal. Does anybody else have any other kind of tips or tricks about how to use a burn?
Don't buy Wild Slash. It's $5. Just buy Shock. Just play your Shocks. They've been good enough for the past 27 years or whatever. They're still good. Just buy Shock. That's it. Just play Shock. It's fine. No one cares.
Yeah, Zach, have you ever bought Wild Slash, Zach?
No, I have not.
Good.
And I came.
And you're the biggest red player. Here.
Well, I had a bunch, and then I donated it a few years ago because it was bulk. It was bulk. No one plays Shock before Pioneer. It was bulk. I gave it away to the needy.
Yeah.
And now here I am contemplating a $20 purchase that I won't make anymore. Thank you, Todd Anderson.
Look, they banned Nexus of Fate. Fog no longer sees heavy play. You already have Stomp.
True.
Just play Shock, dude. It's fine.
Yeah.
I've seen the light, and the light says don't spend $20. I'm going to trust that light.
Just play a mix, so if someone unmoored egos you, then you get to keep a couple.
Or meddling mage is legal, right? Is it?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
It's
I don't want to live in that world.
But anyway, like we said, the burn in this deck, this isn't really a burn deck unless you're in a situation where you need to use the burn cards for that. It's mostly for removal. Do you sideboard the burn out much in matchups against things like combo? I kind of was 50-50 and wasn't sure. I mean, I definitely was bringing in whatever my Spell Punisher card was, whether that was Scab Clan Berserker or Eidolon for burn here and there. But is that kind of the general thought?
So the Lightning Strikes actually come out more than the Shocks, even though they have higher damage.
For sure.
Just the ability to cast them for one is huge for not only Soulscar Mage, but just for natural curve considerations. And a lot of times, Shock actually kills any Planeswalker that ticks down. So if you play against like a Teferi of either variety, or I think Narset going from 3 to 1 is actually just fine for you, right? You just don't want anyway.
Sure.
Most Planeswalkers that tick down, Wild Slash will kill them. So whenever I side out burn spells, I usually side out Lightning Strike.
That was kind of my go-to as well, because it's like 3 damage for 2 mana, not the most efficient thing. If it's a non-creature matchup, or I don't worry about, or one of the things too is I noticed that if I didn't have a lot of good targets for it, like they didn't have things that Lightning Strike would even do much against, it just seemed kind of really inefficient. And so I found myself, bringing it out, because if I have to rely on Soulscar Mage and Lightning Strike to chip creatures down a little bit, it's not always where I want to be. But maybe I played it wrong. Probably did.
I mean, it's all contextual, man. Don't beat yourself up. This deck is extremely hard to play, and sideboarding is the most difficult part of Magic.
Sideboarding is the most difficult part of Magic, and I'm excited to talk about the sideboard for this deck in a little bit, because I think that's where a lot of the edges are gained and lost, and I think I lost quite a bit. But I think one of the most fun set of cards and creatures in this deck are the ones that double as burn spells. So Dave mentioned Stomp, which is the spell side of Bone Crusher Giant, who's our big 2 and a red for a 4/3. That also has like kind of the Punisher effect, where if it gets targeted, it deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. So, hopefully the dream play is you stomp something of theirs, you play it onto the battlefield, they spend their their Lightning Strike to remove it, and they take 2 damage off it. So it's a nice 2 for 1, maybe 3 for 1 in your favor.
Yeah, no, Bone Crusher is one of the best cards in the deck simply because of its versatility and how it operates on the curve. Like I said, a lot of times it's about how much mana you use in the early turns of the game. And one of the reasons why we play Mutavault and are heavy on Mutavault is because it allows us to spend the most mana between myself and my opponent. Now, Bone Crusher Giant just being a 2-drop and a 3-drop by itself means that you can keep a lot of hands that have Glorybringer, Bone Crusher Giant, 4 land, and the last spell is irrelevant. Like those types of hands are just keepable. It's great.
Absolutely. And Bone Crusher Giant is one of those cards that, like Ramanap Ruins we talked about earlier, your opponent, when it's on an adventure, just has to consider at all times, right? Like they have to go, okay, on their turn, they can play a 4/3 that I have to deal with, or if they have 3 cards in hand, et cetera, et cetera. It just is one of those cards where it's like, all right, I'm tapped out, I'm red, your turn. And your opponents go, And I like that. I like making my opponent make more decisions than me.
Awesome. Yeah, tough to argue with Bone Crusher Giant. It's probably one of the best cards that's been printed for Red in the last year for sure, and it's excellent. So let's talk about Glorybringer for a minute. Blast from Amonkhet Standards past. Really powerful
that thing
card
ruled
back then.
the skies.
Yeah, it definitely did. As people know, Glorybringer, 4/4 dragon for 5 with flying haste, and if you exert it, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls, so it doesn't untap the next time, but that is the deal with Glorybringer.
Remember the non-dragon creature part, because I definitely have forgotten that. I was like, I was playing on stream, which I don't do often, but a little anecdote. So I was playing against the mirror, and I had a Glorybringer in my hand, and I was like, well, I need to not play this, because if I play it, then they can play their Glorybringer for more value. And I was like, oh, wait, they can't hit my Glorybringer. And like, I just like, they played theirs and then I played mine out, and I was like exerting it. And I was like, what, why can't I target their Glorybringer? Oh, because I'm an idiot. So remember that.
I tried to do that, but against Nico Bolas, the Ravager, that didn't work out great either.
Yeah. You get bit once and you don't get bit again though.
No. Yeah. Thing. One time.
No, it's worse when you play Thing in the Ice. Thing in the Ice is really bad about it, because there are just some random creatures that are horrors throughout Magic's history that are cropping up in Pioneer, just because there's just new homes for everything.
Sure.
But like the other day, I played against Woe Strider. It's a horror. I don't know if you know that.
I did not realize that was the title.
That's horrifying, Todd.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate that one.
So this was one of the, it sounded earlier when we were talking like you felt like this was one of the definitive adds to the deck.
Oh, for sure. It was originally Reality Smasher in that kind of Eldrazi core, and then we molded it more into a big red deck. And for a long time, we still played Thought-Knots here. And this was, this actually might have been like right before Torbrand got printed, or either that, or it had not been out very long. And it was more of like I don't want to say it's a joke card, but it was like everyone kind of was like, okay, this is just Red's new thing. Like they're, it's not very good. It's really splashy. It's good for Commander, but no, it's just really good. And anyway, but the reason why we're playing Glorybringer is because mostly because of Caleb Durward. Watching him play the 4-color, I forgot, I called it Rhino Glory.
Yeah, like Siege Rhino and Glorybringer and
Bring to Rhino.
Yeah, it was kind of like the original version of the Niv Mizzet deck in Pioneer, even though that version had existed in Modern for quite some time. But yeah, Glorybringer was just pretty early on identified as one of the marquee 5-drops in the format, simply because it gains immediate value. And if people are playing fair, it was one of the best fair cards when it was in Standard. It was literally just a giant thing that dumpstered a creature, and that's what you needed exactly. And in Pioneer, there's so much combat, there's so much hitting the battlefield running, that just having a creature like Glorybringer is just invaluable.
Yeah, it hits so many things.
Right.
Like, it just, like you said, it just can destroy Kalitas. It can hit a Steel Leaf Champion. So many things you want off the board. It does the job.
My favorite thing to hit with it, though, is Teferi Time Raveler. Get rid of that guy.
Yes.
So I can actually play my Rabblemasters, please.
And a Kalitas at the same time.
Yeah.
Dude, what I loved almost killing Okos with it. That's what I loved.
My
Almost.
favorite thing in Magic is when my red spells almost remove Oko from the game.
Oh, yeah.
Do the Elks untap when they're exerted, or no?
This elk is beat.
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. That's the rules question I'm never going to be able to answer.
We don't have to worry about it anymore, at least.
Because exert's not a real keyword. It's like a side word. I don't even know exactly. It's not really even a real ability. It's a made-up thing.
All of it's made up.
Now, they did come with little papers that you put on the cards, and those helped.
The little tokens? Yeah. Little Chuck E. Cheese action. Let's go.
We got to talk about Chain Whirler a little bit, because we know that you're not on it, but a lot of people are.
It's so bad. Next.
That's our triple red 3/3 with first strike. When it ETBs, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So this is kind of one of the argument pieces of the deck, right? It's like, the proponents will say it's awesome with Soulscar Mage, it's really awesome with Torbrand, and then you will say that cutting Mutavault's way too bad. You can't cut Mutavaults, and that's going to be necessary because Chain Whirler's mana requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a league with Chain Whirler and a league without Chain Whirler.
Mhm.
I actually went 4-1 in both leagues. Just
Oh,
barely
look at this
missed.
guy.
Humble brag.
Wow, just dude, you did better than I did on leagues today.
That was this is a rare occurrence, trust me.
Sure.
And the interesting thing to me about Chain Whirler was it mostly was really clumsy, but I feel like it was responsible for me getting some damage through against Mono Green Ramp a couple of times where they got the Elvish Rejuvenator and Llanowar Elves out there at the same time. And it was kind of like that was a deck where it was late enough for me to play it. Against Stompy decks, the tempo is definitely doesn't line up for Chain Whirler versus Llanowar Elf at all. Right. So that was kind of a side benefit. I think I'm definitely on Team Mutavault, so I would go back to that version, but
Yeah, no, the tempo's terrible. And to really echo what Shane's saying, Chain Whirler is good when you have a Silscar Mage, when you have a Torbran. But it really only shines, in my opinion, when you have these other cards where Mutavault is just kind of good all the time. And it's made better by other cards, but has just a much higher floor than Chain Whirler does. Or maybe Chain Whirler has a much higher ceiling because it has this synergy. But in general, I think you're getting much more value out of Mutavault.
Todd, any parting thoughts on Chain Whirler?
Yeah, parting thoughts are I played a bunch with it and it was always bad for me. The end. I never had any success with it.
There's the
I don't know.
definitive word. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, I mean the thing is like some of the most prominent one toughness creatures in the format are Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic, and you cannot wait to kill them. You just can't do it.
What about if mono black is like still 15% of the meta? Like I think mono black is one of the decks that you kind of can expect to see in not necessarily a league, but probably in like one of the Pioneer prelims or probably at like a GP or something like that. I think you can expect to see mono black a few times. Is it still not necessary with all those one toughness creatures on the other side?
The mono black matchup can be tough. Don't get me wrong. They have a lot of resiliency. So if you have a draw that features a bunch of spot removal spells and not a lot of those big threats that close the game, they're going to be able to rebuy their Scrap Heap Scroungers and their Bloodsoaked Champions and such. So you need ways to actually close the game with your spot removal. And but if you play Goblin Chain Whirler instead, Goblin Chain Whirler actually buys you a ton of time against them. It is very strong. It kills a lot of their early threats, and it has a stout body that doesn't die to Fatal Push. But the thing is, like, you never really punish your opponent for not being able to block. And that deck can't block. Like, none of their creatures can block. They're not designed to play defense in the slightest. So Rabblemaster and Warboss are home runs. And while Chain Whirler is certainly great against them and has a lot of viability in other builds and against other matchups, personally, I just think that the Warboss right now is just slightly better.
Sure. Let's talk about kind of like these sort of goldfish win cons, or like kind of the out of the blue sneaky win cons. And I think the cards I'd put there are Torbran, Thrain of Red Fell. So that's 1 red for a 2/4. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So everything you do deals 2 more damage. Does not suck.
I mean, I won a lot of games with Torbran. I will say that, where I was looking at the board, it felt like I didn't really have a way to close out the game fast enough, and then would top deck Torbran and just kind of go to town suddenly. Both from the burn side and from being able to just turn a Rabblemaster and a bunch of tokens into a much more potent threat. So it's great as far as having something to have late game closing power suddenly. And, you know, it's a perfect 2 of in a deck like this, I think.
No, I mean, I'm in the same boat. I think Torbran does exactly what you need it to do in the spots where you need it to do. Because it's legendary, you don't want to play too many of it, but also it will single-handedly win games that you cannot win otherwise, because your Wild Slashes and Lightning Strikes and Stomps do 2 extra damage. All of your tokens, including Ragavan, as well as the Legion Warboss and Rabblemasters tokens, all do 2 extra. And you're just going to find yourself stealing games that you were very far behind because you just happened to draw this 4-mana legendary creature.
Zach, I feel like you kind of identified this card really early on as a red mage, a card you wanted to play. How were you using it, any differently than this deck's using it?
I mean, originally in Pioneer, I was playing like a Chandra tribal build with this, so not really the same. That was more like a red control than like a red mid-range that could possibly go fast. But I love Torbran in here. Like, it's really, most of the time, the perfect top deck you can hope for when you've like have the 4 mana and have any sort of anything on the board. It just gets there instantly. I like this card. I'm really excited about it. For me, it was more grindy and like attrition based, but I think it's just better as like I have a board state already, and this just makes it okay. I win now.
Yeah, it's like an overrun with a 4/4 attached.
Imagine if overrun, did not die to a bunch of removal in the format. Wouldn't that be cool?
Right.
One question I have for you, Todd, is why not a 3 of? Why not kind of the legendary play set where, if you want to see one of your legendaries, you're going to run 3 of them. It's such a good card. It synergizes so well. Why only play 2?
I mean, you kind of answered your own question a little bit there. It is legendary, and if you draw 2 of them, it's usually really bad. It's also one of those cards where it's so late in the curve that it's unlikely to die because your opponent had to kill your Soulscar Mage and then your Goblin Rabblemasters and then your backup Goblin Rabblemasters and then, but if they kill Torbrand, then they're just getting sent to the graveyard by this Glorybringer next turn, One huge consideration is the fact that it costs 3 red, and you are playing 4 copies of Mutavault. So if you ever draw 2 copies of Mutavault and 2 copies of Torbrand, the game's over. You can't win because you can't cast anything. So we kind of mitigate that a little bit by only playing 2 copies, but 3 were certainly in the deck for some time. I think for a while it was actually 2 Chandra, 3 Torbrand, and then Chandra just was excellent, so we just added another one. And I've even had a couple builds that played 4 copies of Chandra because it's so good. But Torbrand is one of those things. It's like a Hershey chocolate bar, right? Like you eat about 2 or 3 bites of a big Hershey chocolate bar, and you're like, "Wow, chocolate is the best."
Right.
And then you get about halfway through it, and you're like, "This, I'm gonna have to save some of this for later. This is too much." And then you're a fat guy like me, and you just eat the whole thing, and afterwards you just feel miserable. So,
Why did I do this?
Yeah, it's Torbrand is chocolate. It's better in moderation. Just don't overdo it.
I mean, he is Toblerone, so.
So if Torbrand is chocolate, is Embercleave like dark chocolate? Like, it's part of the same cut, right? Where you don't want that much of it, and it's good and limited. Like, if Torbrand's 2, Embercleave's a 1, right?
I wouldn't say that it. I would say that it is something like marshmallow, where it pairs very nicely in small doses with chocolate.
Sure. Okay.
And is occasionally okay by itself if there's a fire going.
That's perfect. It's a red deck. There's a lot of fire.
Yeah, Zach, tell us a little bit about Embercleave, because that's one of the most novel cards, one of the newest cards in the deck.
Sure. So Embercleave is 6 mana, 4 and 2 red, although ideally you're not paying that. Legendary artifact equipment. It has flash. It costs 1 less for each attacking creature you control. And when it enters, you get to attach it to a creature you control. So, hey, pretty cool. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, double strike, and trample. Those are very good effects. Equip cost is 3. So actually not that high when it comes to it, because usually if you can cast this, you're casting it 4/3, probably after a Rabblemaster and a token are attacking, something like that. Maybe a Rabblemaster and 2 tokens, etc., etc. But when it's on the battlefield, it's not hard to move around and start equipping. I love this card. I have 2 in my main because I like to lose games.
Yeah, so how does this typically play out, right? Like, so you have this in your hand, and you swing with 3 or 4 creatures, whichever one doesn't get blocked, or maybe if one does get blocked and you just want to kill whatever's getting blocked, you just flash this thing out there and get a bunch of damage through, right?
All right, so Embercleave is like Torbrand, a card that you never really want to draw more than one of, but it's also situationally worse than Torbrand when you're behind. Torbrand can sometimes come down when you're a little bit behind, as long as you can play it and it doesn't die. You get to untap occasionally and kill your opponent. Embercleave is a card that if you're ahead, kills your opponent on the spot, but if you're behind, it is an unplayable Magic card that does nothing. Yeah. And I think anyone who's played any amount of the card in Standard knows exactly that, because a lot of those decks play 4 of them, and you try to pair it with a big monster, and if that falls through, you lose. The game is over. So we try not to be too all in on something like that, but I also recognize that there are matchups like Lotus Field or Ramp or other decks that spot removal is generally bad against, and those are the matchups where one Embercleave is going to save your bacon, and that's why I have 1 main and 1 in the sideboard. 1 main, you draw it sometimes when you need it. Second one comes in, and hey, you got some more.
So speaking of equipment, really quick, this might be a good time to ask about a new one that was debuted in Theros Beyond Death in Shadow Spear. So this is a card that I've tested out a little bit and had some pretty fun success with. How do you feel about it in this Chonky Red build?
I haven't tried it myself, but I think you could maybe build the deck significantly differently to utilize it. Does it? I forget. It gives lifelink and what?
It gives +1/+1, lifelink, and trample, and then you can also pay 1 and permanents your opponent's control lose indestructible and hexproof.
I think that effect is not as desirable in this deck simply because hexproof creatures that see play in the format are just. You're not going to be able to draw the equipment and be able to kill the creature in time. They have hexproof, but usually because your opponent is suiting a bunch of stuff onto it and you just die.
No, absolutely. I found the indestructible more helpful. I've been able to get past soul flayers and in soul artifacts.
Right. My second thing was also the Soulscar Mage kind of fills that role for you. But if you do want more effects like that, then yeah, it is something that maybe you can sideboard a couple because Soul Flare is particularly problematic for this deck.
Sure. Yeah, I had a tough time with Soul Flare.
I could not beat it without. Yeah, it was brutal.
That deck is something else. It's either a 10 or a 2. It's never like in between.
Yeah. Love decks like that, right?
So the take on Shadow Spear is open to it. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the cards that have seen play in this archetype in the past, I am willing to try again. And anything new that could fit, I'm also just willing to try because I think Bone Crusher Giant is the only card that I want to play 4 of. And Glorybringer maybe, and I could definitely maybe cut 1 at some point because I've had versions that only play 3. And if the format becomes more combo-oriented, shifts definitely just matter.
That's interesting. I'm so sorry to ask another question right away. Why not for Rabblemaster?
So Rabblemasters is just a powerful 3-drop, but it shines in a format where you can kind of ride your damage over the course of a few turns. And I think that there's probably going to be a spot in the format where Goblin Rabblemasters is just not good because too many people just have too many creatures on the table. If too many creatures are on the table, Goblin Rabblemasters is not very good. And half the reason why we played Embercleave was because it made Goblin Rabblemasters significant even against matchups where they had a bunch of creatures on the ground. Nowadays, though, it's just not. It's not a sacred cow. Is all I really want to say. Bone Crusher Giant shines. Probably playing for that card no matter what. Everything else, I could take it or leave it.
Awesome. All right, the last card we're going to talk about quickly is Chandra, Torch of Defiance. The single planeswalker in the deck. It's usually run as a 3 of right now. I'm not going to read all the abilities on Chandra. I did want to talk about this card for a minute. It's funny that you brought up the kind of like sacred cows of the deck a minute ago, because my impression after playing the deck was that the like 3 pillars of the deck were Glorybringer, Rabblemaster, and Chandra as being like the keys to having a really aggressive plan, a bit of removal attached to an aggressive plan, and also a card that gives you card advantage and removal in Chandra. And so it felt to me like those were the 3 cards that I felt like the deck was actually built around. So it's really interesting for me to hear you say that maybe Bone Crusher Giant is sort of the one of the cards that's also at that same power level and maybe even stands above kind of everything else as far as like the card that you want the most in this deck.
I mean, it's the only card I want 4 of, period.
Right.
Like everything else, I could cut it entirely. I would not care. And I think a lot of that is just because of the flexibility of Bone Crusher Giant puts it a level ahead of every other card in the deck. And I sincerely mean that. I think that Bone Crusher Giant is probably the best red card printed in the last 10 years. I haven't played with a card that I thought was better, more powerful. Yes. More powerful. Yeah. But a card that does exactly what a red deck wants to do and kill a creature and provide you with a threat. It is, in my opinion, probably as good as Flametongue Kavu. And I haven't seen a card that was as good as Flametongue Kavu in probably 15 years.
Yeah, that's impressive to hear.
Yeah, I think Bone Crusher is great. I'm playing as a 4 of my modern deck. I like the utility of it. There's times where, like we mentioned before, you end step stomp, play it on turn 3. There's times where you turn 5, stomp, and then play it. The utility of it, the fact that it's, able to get in for 4 sometimes, the fact that you can have the Punisher effect, all around, it just does enough and really is there. And I am really excited and happy about it. Who knows? Maybe we'll see more, aggressive costed giants like this. There's that 4-drop in the new set, maybe cool for Pioneer as well. But I like where this is leading, and I like this card, and I agree. It's a 4 of in this deck, and it's a 4 of in it's just good. It's a modern staple to me in red decks at this point, for big red decks at this point.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about it is the mana flexibility too, where it's like, you you get it. You have a 2-drop essentially because you can do something on 2 if you want to. You can remove something. You can deal damage to your control opponent. Then on 3, you can play it if it makes sense there, or you could save it for later and play like a Legion War Boss or a Rabblemaster. It's just so flexible, and it just does so many little things. I love it.
I mean, if you really sit and think about it, the card actually has like 7 different casting costs, right? The baseline, it costs 2. To do anything, it costs 2. But that's not where it stops. It's a 2-drop that's also a 3-drop in the games where you have to have a 2-drop into a 3. It's a 5-drop. A lot of times you play it on 2 or with 2 mana on like turn 4 while also using Lightning Strike to kill something, or both of them together to kill a large creature. And then later on you just have this 3 mana thing kind of floating around. It's so unique. There's no real other card in Magic to compare it to because the adventure mechanic is just so weird. I think Flashback maybe is the best, but at the same time, like just being able to hard cast it from your hand for 3 mana on curve is also just very good.
Yeah. Again, Adventure just like proving how amazing of a mechanic it is, and how I actually think they did a pretty good job in creating cards that were not fundamentally broken for something that could have easily been broken.
All right, so we talked a lot about the cool lands part earlier, and I think since we're crunched on time a little bit, we can kind of jump through that. If you care about the lands, we talked about those earlier on in the episode.
They're very good.
Very good lands, y'all. A bunch of mountains and some cool utility lands. So let's get into the sideboard a little bit. So mono-colored decks don't always get the best sideboard options, and red does have a little bit of strain in certain areas, I think. But how do you try to mitigate that? So we see like 3 or 4 Tormod's Crypt as kind of the current anti-graveyard plan. Do you think that's enough right now?
I mean, I think it's certainly given me enough breathing room against the matchup where I'm comfortable with it. I think playing any more than 4 of any one type of effect in your sideboard is often a mistake, because if that particular matchup requires more than 4 cards, it's often a bad enough matchup where you shouldn't be playing your deck. And if you can shore up a matchup with 4 cards, then you should keep playing your deck, Tormod's Crypt I chose specifically because it is able to gain its effect even through an opponent having an answer to it. And I think a lot of times people just rely way too heavily on stuff like Leyline of the Void or Grafdigger's Cage, and they kind of give themselves this false sense of security when every single dredge or graveyard-based opponent is bringing in 4 disenchant effects at the minimum. And I chose it because it's all I need. My deck is so strong in the mid game because it's a mid-range deck that if you just have the one Tormod's Crypt to slow them down, you actually just turn them into a mid-range deck, and you're the best mid-range deck. So the end.
Yeah. So if they target it, you can just pop it. You don't lose its value.
And it's not as good when that happens. And a lot of times you just got to find the right spot where a Narcomoeba is about to enter the battlefield, or 2 Creeping Chills are about to go off, and that 6 life buffer is going to give them 2 turns when, you just got to find the right spots to pop it. I have ended games before without popping it because my opponent was too scared to make me pop it. And so there's this weird dance where, I have to find the right spot to use it before they find their Assassin's Trophy, or before they can get max value out of their Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay or what have you. But the long story short is that you just play something like Tormod's Crypt because you're guaranteed to get some effect out of it before it dies. Whereas the others, like your opponent can just, like if you don't have a clock, your opponent just has a bunch of time to kill it, and then they get to keep doing their thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tried out Leyline in one of the builds that I had to, and I definitely missed Tormod's Crypt. It was
how many times did you draw the second Leyline?
Fortunately,
how many times did you just draw a Leyline after your opening hand?
So in one game, I drew 3 Leylines, and so that was enough for me to remember why I didn't want to play Leyline anymore unless I absolutely had to. And Hogak's not around, so I guess I'm good not doing that.
I think an important sideboard card we should touch on too is Scab Clan Berserker. Because this is interesting to me because I know that Zach is a huge Eidolon of the Great Revel fan.
I was going to say, does it look weird because did you think I forgot Eidolon of the Great Revel existed? Or?
No, I mean, after playing with Scab Clan, I think you can see the power level and the utility there for sure. So talk about Scab Clan and how you chose that over Eidolon.
I did. It actually was Eidolon for a long time, like not long, like a month. It was. I played against Lotus Field and at the time Simic Nexus so much that I just was like, okay, I'm not going to lose these decks anymore. I'm going to like play a bunch of Eidolons and call it a day, right? And then in the same league, I lost to Simic Nexus and I lost to Lotus Field combo with an Eidolon on the table. They just had a bunch of Nexus and stalled out at 2 life both times. And the Lotus Field deck just actually doesn't have they have just Hidden Strings is basically their only cheap thing after they start comboing, because everything else is Pour Over the Pages, Dig Through Time.
They all cost 20 mana.
Right.
Yeah.
And even Granted off of the Fae of Wishes cost 4, so they don't take any damage off of it.
Right.
So I lost so many times with an Eidolon the Great Revel on the table that I just said, screw it. And I just decided to find one that was better. And that for a while that was Damping Sphere. But after a while I realized that I need that thing to actually attack some. And I need that card to also be good against Blue Eye Control. And Scab Clan Berserker was actually just the perfect fit for the spot. Now, things can change, and things have changed every now and then. Like I'm playing against more Arboreal Grazers now, and it's significantly worse against Arboreal Grazer than Eidolon the Great Revel. So, and that is just another one of those spots that's in flux. Personally, I haven't had a major tournament to play with this archetype in over a month. And so the list that you're seeing keep popping up, still doing well because the deck's just really good. But I would personally change probably like 10, 15 cards in it over the course of like a given 2-week stint if I just wanted to make it the best it was going to be in this field.
Yeah. I think some other things that you're probably always just sort of have to play in this deck, and maybe you don't. I'd like to hear your opinion on this. So a Braid, sometimes I think you just got to get stuff like Aether Sphere Harvester off the board. I think you already have so much creature removal. It's probably is it just for the artifact removal with kind of a little bit of upside?
So my take on Pioneer format as a whole is that you can't have too many cards that don't target creatures if they have some sort of targeted ability. Like Boros Charm, for example, I think is an unplayable card in the format, because if you have a Boros Charm in your hand on the play and your opponent plays Llanowar Elves, you lose the game. Like you can't, you're not going to deal them enough damage. Your burn spells aren't good enough. No one's playing Fetch Shock bases, so they're not taking as much damage from their lands. Cards like Boros Charm and outside of the most dedicated burn decks imaginable are bad.
What if I have Feather?
What if you have Feather? I mean, that's a different. No, that's a different. I mean, or are you just giving it Double Strike a bunch?
Yeah, well, I mean that is what I did with it. Was I give it Double Strike and then I would hit somebody with the 4.
That's worse than Defiant Strike. I don't know what to tell you. The bar is completely different when you have a Feather on the table. But it's not so much that they're unplayable. I speak a lot in hyperbole because it's the easiest way to get my point across. But what I really want to just hammer through is that you need your cards to be versatile and you need them to be able to answer creatures. And a Braid is a disenchant effect that the deck sorely needs, that also has the ability to just kill a creature in the meanwhile. Like if you're playing against an Aether Sphere, a deck with Aether Sphere Harvester in it, yes, that card is problematic, and a Braid is excellent against that. But they can also just play Rankle. And if you have a Smash Smithereens in your hand, you're dead. The game's over. But if it's a Braid, sometimes you win, and that's great. Yeah.
All right, Todd, we're getting tight on time. I think we got to talk a little bit about the future of this deck. So we have some big changes coming up with the new Theros set. We have new decks. We have when a deck gets popular in the metagame, people try to fight it. So we have all those things coming up with Chonky Red. What do you think about the future of Chonky Red?
It's tough because I don't want to say that the deck is like not as good as it was a week ago, but honestly, it's not as good as it was a week ago. Simply put, people are starting to adapt. More eyes are actually on the Pioneer format because it's a Pro Tour coming up. So you have a lot of the best players in the game all kind of delving into the format on Magic Online. Various Grand Prix are coming up or happening, and people are just finding that, hey, beating a monocolor deck, even if it's mid-range with a bunch of really strong cards, is not that hard. All you have to do to beat Chonky Red is go a little bit bigger than them. And you know what deck goes a little bit bigger than Chonky Red?
Niv Mizzet.
Niv Mizzet. That card's ridiculous. And like your spot removal is bad against them. So they are the perfect foil to your strategy because they're a mid-range deck that's not vulnerable to removal spells that goes way over the top of Glorybringer. And that's just not something you're well equipped to handle. With that said, there's not really a lot of great aggro decks in the format. And So there's nothing really to prey on the Niv-Mizzet deck for stumbling or being a little slower than the other decks. Outside of mono black aggro, which I think is potentially not even that bad of a matchup because of stuff like Siege Rhino just gaining you a bunch of life.
Yeah, woof.
So to put it simply, the deck is still extremely good. If you want to do well in a tournament, I think you could do a lot worse than picking up the current 75 that everyone has just been playing and doing well with. But I would also be looking to explore a lot of new stuff from Theros Beyond Death, as well as just new stuff popping up in the format, because it's always best to just keep an open mind.
Sure. And I mean, not to spoil the whole article, it still is under premium lockdown, but some of the things you mentioned was, and you also mentioned here, is checking out things like Rekindling Phoenix, checking out things like Hand War Garrison, Hand War Battlements. Those are some options that you might help it fight the mirror or fight decks with more removal.
No, exactly. I think just being open to changing cards in your deck to be slightly better against the more popular decks in the format, that's just good deck building, for lack of a better term. That's just how you're supposed to approach Magic tournaments. And if you are playing the same 75 you play in every event, then either the format's bad or you're bad. Like, no offense. Like you just got to be updating with the times. And that's not to say that, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking the same 75 to FNM every week, because you just don't have the time to change it.
Is that Colhan? Is that you?
Lives. I Magic is my life, right? I have that luxury to be able to spend 40 hours a week playing, talking, thinking about Magic, and not a lot of people do. So don't take it the wrong way. But just, if you want to be at the top level, just make sure that you are always open to be flexible and always open to change your deck.
Yeah, makes good sense. So I think we have a little bit of time to do some listener questions. So we'll take a quick break and then we'll head on into the wind down for some listener questions for Todd. All right, Todd. So we have some questions from our Patreons in the Dive Down Nation. A little bit more fun, more loose. So KZ asks, do you think there's an opportunity to splash something like white or black, or is the mana consistency and the ability to run Mutavault too large of a benefit to want to give up?
I think there's always going to be some give and take, but for the most part, the mono red one is the best one at the moment. However, with the encroaching 5-color Niv-Mizzet deck being like pretty problematic, I am definitely open to looking into other colors to solve those problems. I think something like Nahiri the Harbinger could be quite good in just like getting rid of some of like problematic creatures or random enchantments. And generally speaking, you're mono red deck, you can't really deal with enchantments, so having white in your deck has a lot of merit to it. As far as black is concerned, I've seen a number of strategies incorporating Scrap Heap Scrounger alongside Unlicensed Integration. I'm not the hugest fan of it because you are just ruining your mana base, and allied color strategies are pretty bad in the format.
Yeah. I played against a deck, mono red deck, essentially the same mono red deck that had Croxa in it, which was kind of a surprise and beat me because I was playing mono red, and so Croxa's a little bigger than me, but it still seemed like pretty unstable to me, although it did kind of prove to me that card might be okay.
No, I mean, the Titans are certainly strong, and I think Marrow actually had a whole article about like why they only chose 2 of the actual 5 Titan cycle they had access to, because it's better to just have the best, right, and only have a couple than trying to spread them out among things arbitrarily.
Interesting. So we have one more question, or another question from Jason in our Patreon, who asked if you could identify one of the big level up moments in your career, what was the time where you suddenly realized that you thought Magic could be your future?
That's hard to pinpoint exactly. I'll say that obviously winning a tournament is a big deal, and that can occasionally propel you, and it certainly did me. But the point where I knew that I could like play Magic semi-professionally at the very least was just after seeing a lot of success playing against good players on Magic Online. And not to say that Magic Online is the place to do that, but Magic Online and Magic Arena now are just places where you can play a high number of raw games. Digitizing the experience turns it into much more of an experience of grinding rather than just being smarter than people. And so it feels way more about just getting better mechanically so that you can actually utilize your brain power on things that matter, like strategically, as opposed to just making sure you don't misclick or tap the wrong land or whatever, like stuff like that. You just can't, when you're playing high level play, you can't sit there and think, okay, well, I need to tap these two lands. And I have people in my chat all the time who are just like, dude, you can't, what are you doing? Why are you tapping your lands like that? It's like, I'm not casting anything else. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Why would I leave up red, blue instead of blue, red? Like, because you want to bluff counterflux and it doesn't matter.
What a spell to bluff too. Oh my goodness.
I'm bluffing the overload on counterflux just in case.
When it doesn't matter, don't put too much thought into it, because that is when you start expending way too much mental energy. But as far as like the level up moment, just play a bunch. If you feel yourself getting better, like if you hit Mythic for the first time on Arena and you didn't think that you could do that, like that might be your level up moment. If you 5-0 a Magic Online preliminary or top 8 a PTQ, that can be your level up moment where you realize that maybe I'm actually pretty good at this.
All right. Moving on to a question from Ron. How has streaming Pioneer from the inception of the format itself and other creators really contributed to the meta? Like, is this sort of the thing where you feel like people who are streaming content creators have had a bigger thumbprint than in modern?
I think that modern was kind of brought about right before streaming became a thing. Like Twitch existed, but it wasn't that popular, and it certainly wasn't a place where most people got their decks. And I think in that time period, websites that ran strategy articles were king of the crop for just like giving you not only the best strategy content, but also providing you with the best deck list possible. But now people get that in real time from streaming, and so the formats change faster. People see what works and doesn't work. You don't need to go 5-0 to know that the combo is good. Like I go 3-2 all the time, and I'm like, this deck is ridiculous because I'm literally just misplaying over and over again because I pick up a different deck like every league, and I just want to try stuff out. And so I'm way more on the feel side of it, where this new Underworld Breach combo, for example, is just unreasonable. But I am bad. I am bad. But the card is just Yawgmoth's Will for 2 mana. Like it is unreal. But I haven't gone 5-0 yet because I suck.
Is the big combo there, just to be clear, is it comboing it in the Lotus Field shell, basically? Is that what
it doesn't have to, but yeah. I mean, the thing about the card is that there's so many weird ways to pair it with various things. Like you can combo kill your opponent with Hidden Strings, Lotus Field, and Tome Scour. That is a kill.
Oh, geez.
That's a kill because you mill your whole deck. Because
you remember Tome Scour?
Yeah, Tome Scour just mill 5, right? That is a deterministic kill, and it's not even a question. It's not like, oh, you might miss. No, you mill 5, you untap the 2 things, and then you just have the mana to cast them both again. Like you just, because you gain 2 mana on the exchange, so you just get to mill yourself for 10, and that fuels the future escape costs of the rest of the things. Like it's a stupid card. It should not exist.
Well,
period. Point blank.
That's scary. All right, Todd, we're going to wrap up, but before we get to our stuff, plug yourself. Where can people find you? When can they find you?
You can find me streaming at twitch.tv/strong_sad. Check out my stream basically every day, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Mostly playing Pioneer. I will be delving into Modern soon, and I played some Legacy the other day. That was quite a bit of fun. You can check out my articles on starcitygames.com. I'm usually put up on Thursday. I do commentary for the SCG Tour. You can check that out on twitch.tv/StarCityGames. A lot of weekends, whenever we have an open, I'll be there. And last but not least, you can follow me on Twitter, strong_sad. I know there's a theme going here. Strong_sad on Twitter. And I talk a lot about Magic, but also update my stream schedule and stuff. So if you want to follow the stream, that is certainly somewhere you can find me posting quite regularly. Also dunking on jerks.
Yeah, Todd, you are, even before you agreed to come on this podcast, you are one of my favorite streams to have on during the day. So I encourage all of our listeners to check you out. It's fun to be on the Todd Squad, see some of those Quiznos sub-rats singing all the time.
Subs.
Like the subs.
I can't wait for the NDA from the non-existent Quiznos. Corporation.
Quiznos is back from the dead to sue you into oblivion.
Yeah. Just
I forgot to send you this, Todd. I was at a folk art museum this weekend in Santa Fe, right? And there was a piece of art that looked like 25 subrats. And I need to send it to you. I took a photo of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'll definitely show it on stream. Put in, just join my Discord and then post it up in there.
Will do. So that wraps up this week's show. Todd, thanks again for being on with us. So
yeah, no problem.
If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the pod so you can get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review. Helps people find us, makes us feel good about ourselves. If you want to submit a question to us or to Todd, you can shoot us an email at thedivedown@gmail.com. Tweet at us or at Todd. We're the Dive Down, all one word, on Twitter. If you want to support the show, join the Patreon. Joining at any tier gets you access to the super secret Slack server, patreon.com/thedivedown. Of course, manatraders.com. Thanks again for sponsoring us. You can sign up for Mana Traders using promo code THEDIVEDOWN, all one word, for 15% off your first 3 months. And thanks again to the bands Nowhere and Space Blood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and make a goblin!